The train rocked with the old steady insistence of iron on track, a rhythm that turned conversation into murmurs and secrets into something that could be held between the teeth. In the corridor, where the window glass was filmed with rain and soot, Tom Riddle stood as if the sway of the carriage had been made for him alone. He did not brace himself with an elbow like the others. He did not laugh too loudly or lean into the frame of the door for attention. He simply existed, still, composed, and inevitable. Outside, the countryside slid past in a blur of hedgerows and low fields, dark and early. There were Muggle towns out there, their lights pin-pricking the dusk, their roofs blacked out in fear of bombs. Their war had begun to stain even the wizarding world, not by fire or falling stone, but by an atmosphere that seeped into people and tightened their voices. Students arrived with eyes a little older than the summer before, with trunks packed hastily, with letters from home that carried worry like a smell. Tom had no home to write to. The thought should have made him small, should have made him hungry in the way desperate boys were hungry. Instead, it steadied him. The castle at the end of these rails was the closest thing the world had to a throne ever built without admitting it was one. Hogwarts did not belong to the Ministry. It did not belong to bloodlines or governors. It did not belong to the families who bragged about ancestors. It belonged to itself, and to those who understood what it was. A fortress with a beating heart, ancient, clever, and proud. Tom's fingers rested on the latch of his trunk, feeling the reassuring heft of it beneath his palm. Inside were books he'd borrowed and never returned, notes written in a precise hand, a small vial of ink that never seemed to empty, and wrapped in a handkerchief like a communion wafer, a diary so plain it looked almost insulting. He carried nothing that would incriminate him, nothing that would frighten a teacher who searched too quickly. His true possessions were less tangible. Names, rumors, the careful observations of who followed whom, who envied whom, who would sell their dignity for a kind word. Down the corridor, a cluster of younger boys drifted past, cheeks flushed from sweets and the thrill of returning. One of them glanced at Tom's badge and straightened instinctively, as if the medal itself could compel respect. Tom offered a faint nod, polite, mild, almost generous, and watched the boy's relief bloom like a secret confession. Control was easiest when it felt like safety. The whistle at the front of the train cried into the wet evening. Somewhere a door slammed. Laughter flared and died. Tom turned from the window and began to walk, unhurried, toward the compartment where those worth shaping would be waiting, and where the first pieces of the year would be placed exactly where he wished them. They rose when he entered, not because he demanded it. Tom never demanded what he could inspire, but because the air itself seemed to shift in acknowledgement. The lantern over the luggage rack burned with a greenish tint, caught in the glass shade, painting their faces in bruised light. 4 boys sat and stood like a court in miniature, each wearing the confidence of his name like armor, and each with eyes that betrayed the same thing beneath it, the desire to be chosen. Tom let the door click shut behind him. He did not smile broadly. He did not greet them with warmth. He offered them something more intoxicating than affection, attention. Abraxas was nearest the window, his posture perfect, his hair combed as precisely as if he'd done it with a measuring charm. He spoke first, eager to prove himself without seeming eager. "You received my owl." "I did," Tom said. His voice was quiet enough that they leaned in, compelled. "And I appreciated the effort, not the information. The effort." Cassius, long-faced and restless, shifted as though the seat had suddenly turned to thorns. It's difficult to obtain anything reliable from the prefects of other houses. They're suspicious. "Nani, until." "Of you," Tom corrected mildly. "Not of me." Tristan's mouth tightened. Gaius watched Tom without blinking, the most cautious of the 4, as if he were weighing whether admiration could be dangerous. Tom thought it wise of him. Wisdom could be twisted. Caution could be made into loyalty. Bravery was the dullest tool. Tom moved to the bench opposite them and sat with the unhurried grace of someone accustomed to rooms making space. "This year," he said, The castle will be anxious. People always grow careless when they're anxious. They cling to whatever voice sounds steady, whatever hand seems certain. That hand will be mine. Then me. Ma. Abraxas's eyes brightened, almost feverish. You mean as head boy? In time. Tom laced his fingers together. Titles matter only to those who need them. Influence is older than titles. Influence is what makes teachers hesitate before they scold. Influence is what makes students repeat your words as if they were their own thoughts. Cassius swallowed. And us? Tom tilted his head, as if amused by how plainly Cassius wanted assurance. You will be seen with me, he said. You will speak when I choose you to speak, and you will be silent when silence is valuable. You will learn the habits of people in your dormitories and houses, not merely their gossip. Who writes home? Who is terrified of being expelled? Who is in love? Who is... Who is... Tristan frowned. That seems... petty. Tom's gaze landed on him like a cool hand against a fevered forehead. Petty is a word used by people who cannot imagine consequences. I am not interested in petty things. I am interested in leverage. Gaius finally spoke, voice low. And if someone refuses to be leveraged? Tom's expression did not change. Then they will be made an example, he said, as if discussing whether. But not yet. Not openly. Fear is useful only when it is controlled. You do not spill it across the floor like ink. The train lurched, and the lanterns swung. In the greenish light, their faces looked like carved stone, young, arrogant, and suddenly aware of the depth beneath Tom's calm. Outside, rain hammered the glass as if impatient for the castle that waited. Tom listened to their breathing, to the small sounds of their swallowed objections and quickened hope. He could feel the year ahead like a map unfolding in his mind. Corridors, portraits, secrets, and a sleeping power under the school that had waited centuries for the right tongue to wake it. He did not tell them that part. Not yet. A king did not reveal his dragon before his court had learned to kneel. The feast in the great hall had barely settled into memory when the first invitation came. It arrived folded into the shape of something elegant, slipped into Tom's hand with a conspiratorial whisper by a second year eager to be useful. The parchment smelled faintly of wine and spice, as if it had been written over a table already laid. Tom arrived precisely on time. Horace Slughorn's office, warm despite its dungeon walls, glowed with candlelight reflected in glass jars and polished brass. The room was curated to impress, shelves lined with ingredients both rare and theatrically displayed. A rug that looked too expensive to be allowed near student shoes. Armchairs softened by cushions that suggested indulgence was a virtue. Horace beamed as Tom entered, the man's geniality like a cloak he threw over everyone in the room. There you are, he said, as if Tom's presence completed the arrangement. Come, sit by me. I was telling them about your essay. Brilliant, truly, brilliant. Tom inclined his head in acknowledgement, neither modest nor arrogant. He took the offered chair, near enough to be favored, far enough to be seen. Around the small gathering, students smiled nervously, measuring their own worth against the ease with which Tom occupied attention. Horace poured goblets, talking the way some people breathed, naming famous witches and wizards as if their achievements were personal acquaintances. Tom listened, making the right noises at the right moments. He watched the professor's hands, the rings, the slight tremor when he lifted the decanter, the way he lingered near one shelf where a small silver box sat, locked and warded more carefully than the rest. It wasn't that Tom coveted whatever was inside. Coveting was a crude emotion. He noted it, the way he noted everything, and filed it away for a day when knowledge would become a key. Your mother must be so proud, Horace said suddenly, voice thick with sentimental assumption. Tom's eyes did not flicker. She died when I was very young, he replied softly, letting the words carry just enough sorrow to make the room tilt toward him. Horace flushed, horrified. "Oh, my dear boy, Tom. I didn't mean—" "It's quite all right," Tom said, gentle as forgiveness. "It's kind of you to imagine I have someone." The pity in the room was immediate and useful. Pity made people generous. Pity made them careless. Tom accepted it as he accepted the goblet placed in his hand, sipping without urgency. Horace leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You'll go far," he murmured, as if sharing a secret prophecy. "Farther than most. I've always had an eye for talent. Connections matter, you know. The right people, the right opportunities." Tom allowed a small smile, private, almost tender. "Of course," he said, "and I'm grateful for your guidance." Later, when laughter rose and Horace became distracted by his own stories, Tom spoke quietly to a girl whose father worked in the ministry, to a boy whose aunt sat on the Wisengamot. He asked questions that sounded like interest. He offered compliments that sounded like truth. Each exchange left something behind, a sense that knowing Tom was valuable, that being useful to Tom might one day be rewarded. When he left the office, the corridor outside felt colder. The stones sweated with damp, and the torches burned low. Tom walked without haste, his mind already adjusting its map. Horace collected names and futures like ornaments. Tom collected something else, the levers that moved them. The first weeks of term were always a sorting of currents. Friendships forming like crystals, rivalries sharpening, teachers testing the limits of attention. Tom moved through it all as though the castle had built its corridors to direct him precisely where he needed to be. He walked patrol after curfew with the prefect badge catching torchlight like a small, cold star. Younger students looked at it with the same awe they looked at the moving staircases. When they were found lingering too late in an alcove, giggling with contraband sweets, Tom did not bark at them like a lesser prefect might. He spoke softly, as if he were doing them a favor by correcting them. "You'll catch your death wandering," he told one trembling first year whose candle had burned down to a stub. "Come along. I'll see you safely back." The boy's gratitude was immediate and excessive. It followed Tom like a loyal dog. Tom let it. Gratitude was a kind of leash. By day, he sat in classes with the attentive stillness that made professors relax. He answered when called upon, never too quickly. Brilliance needed to look effortless, not eager. By evening, he drifted in and out of conversations in the common room, the green light of the lake above them wavering through the windows, turning faces into something underwater and secret. He spoke to the loudest, the quietest, the bitterest, the brightest. He listened to their complaints about homework, their boasts about family, their whispered fears about older siblings at the front of the Muggle War. When someone mentioned a locked door in the fourth-floor corridor, Tom asked, mildly, "Who told you it's locked?" as if the question were idle. When a girl muttered about a Hufflepuff's suspicious herb-gathering habits, Tom asked, "What time does she go?" with the same casual tone he might have used to inquire about supper. Pieces. Always pieces. Abraxas began to bring him small offerings, a password overheard, a note passed between two students, a rumor about a professor's temper. Cassius brought darker things, ingredients stolen from a cabinet, a list of names of students who met secretly in an unused classroom. Tristan and Gaius brought what was most valuable, the observation of patterns. Who followed whom? Who avoided whom? Who always looked toward the staff table as if expecting judgment. Tom never praised too much. Praise made people greedy. He rewarded with small signs, an extra seat by him at dinner, a quiet word that made them feel seen. In the evenings, when the common room's chatter grew thick and sleepy, Tom would slip away as if he were simply retiring early. Instead, he wandered. The castle at night was a different creature. Its portraits whispered more freely. Its staircases moved with a kind of sleepy malice. The suits of armor seemed to lean closer, their halberds angled like eavesdroppers. The air smelled of cold stone and extinguished candles. Tom learned the timing of the prefect patrols that were not his own. He learned where the ghosts drifted, where Peeves tended to lurk, where a door's hinges complained and where they did not. He learned which teachers stayed up late grading and which retired early behind wards that hummed faintly in the stone. On a Thursday night, he stood in a corridor near the library, listening to the distant echo of footsteps. A portrait of a stern witch watched him with narrowed eyes. "You're out late," she sniffed. Tom looked at her with polite interest, as though he had all the time in the world. "So are you," he said. The witch huffed, offended by the implication that her endless hanging on the wall constituted a kind of curfew violation. Tom smiled faintly and moved on. He was not merely breaking rules. He was learning the castle as a ruler learned a city, where the gates were, where the hidden alleys led, where the guards grew lazy. And beneath the stone and candle smoke, beneath the shifting stairs and chattering portraits, he could feel something else, a secret older than any living teacher, sleeping like a coiled beast beneath the school's heart. The restricted section smelled like old leather and older dust, a scent of time itself. Tom moved through it with a confidence that would have scandalized anyone who thought rules were walls rather than suggestions. The door had been charmed, of course. Everything at Hogwarts was charmed. But charms were made by minds, and minds left patterns. A word was a sentence, and Tom had always been good with languages. Abraxas held the lantern low, its light caught and swallowed by the endless spines of books. Cassius flinched at every creak of wood. Tristan's mouth was drawn tight, as if he were holding back both excitement and nausea. Gaius walked behind Tom, eyes sweeping, attentive to the slightest shift in shadow. Tom stopped before a shelf that looked no different from the others, except that the dust on its lower edge had been disturbed in a faint arc, as though something had been removed and replaced often enough to leave a whisper of absence. He reached, fingers unhesitating, and drew out a book bound in dark green. A serpent was embossed on the cover, its scales picked out in dull silver. Tristan's breath caught. "That's a history," Tom said lightly, flipping it open. The pages crackled, brittle with age. Ink had faded in places, but the words remained, stubborn as bones. Tom read without moving his lips, his eyes sliding across the lines with hungry ease. There were stories of the founders, of feuds and ideals, and the compromises that built a castle. There were mentions of secret passages built for defense, for escape, for indulgence. There were, buried like a knife under cloth, references to a legend that professors dismissed as childish terror. Salazar Slytherin, the text said, had left something behind. Tom let his fingers trace the serpent illustrations, the curling shapes that seemed to shift in the lantern light. Somewhere deep in his chest, something answered. An instinct, a recognition, a warmth like blood remembering its own path. "Listen," Tom murmured, and they did because they always did. In the silence, beneath the distant murmur of the castle settling, there was a faint, almost imagined sound. Not footsteps, not wind. Something like a breath drawn through stone. Cassius whispered, "Do you hear it?" Tom's eyes stayed on the page. "It's old," he said. "Older than this room, older than any of us." Abraxas swallowed hard. "What is it?" Tom closed the book softly, as though tucking a child into bed. "A promise," he said. "And a weapon." They stared at him, the lantern light carving their expressions into sharp planes. Tom watched them in return, measuring their fear, their fascination. A man could be led many places by fear if he offered them the illusion of safety at the end. "Will you show us?" Tristan asked, voice rough. Tom's smile was almost kind. "Not yet," he said. "You don't draw a sword in a room full of fools. You learn who would hold it steady and who would cut themselves." He slid the book back into its place. For a moment, he rested his palm against the shelf, feeling the cold wood beneath it. The sound, the breathing, the whisper, seemed to pulse faintly in response. When they left, moving like thieves between towering shelves, Tom's mind was already racing ahead. The legend had always been a story for the gullible. Now it was something else, a lever hidden deep beneath the castle, waiting for the right hand to pull it. He would not be satisfied with being admired. Admiration was thin. He wanted obedience. He wanted the school to shift around him the way it shifted around the staircases, automatically, unquestioningly, as if it had never been built to do anything else. Ghosts had their own kind of power. They could go where living bodies could not. They could linger where secrets had been spoken and absorb them like smoke in fabric. Most people treated them like decorations, curiosities to be avoided or laughed at. Tom treated them like witnesses. He found the Grey Lady in a corridor lined with portraits of dead witches and wizards who pretended not to listen. She floated near an empty frame, as if she had been anchored there by grief too heavy to drift away from. Her face was pale in the candlelight, her eyes deep with a sorrow that made other students uncomfortable. Tom approached alone, letting Abraxas and Gaius remain farther back. He wanted the Grey Lady to feel chosen, not hunted. "My lady," he said softly, and the title was deliberate. Respect was a key that fit more locks than force. The Grey Lady turned her head as though the movement pained her. "You are out of bed," she said, voice thin as frost. "I often am," Tom replied. "The castle is quieter at night." "Quieter for mischief," she murmured. Tom's expression held the faintest trace of amusement. "Quieter for truth." Her eyes narrowed. Ghosts could not be flattered easily. They had seen too much. Yet they could be tempted. Tom sensed it in the way her gaze lingered, assessing him not as a child, but as something stranger. "You want something," she said. Tom inclined his head. "I want to understand Hogwarts," he answered honestly enough to be convincing. "It is older than any of us. It remembers. I think it rewards those who learn its ways." The Grey Lady's mouth twitched in a shadow of disdain. "The castle does not reward. It endures." "And yet," Tom said, his voice gentle, "it has secrets. It has hidden places meant for certain kinds of people. People who do not fear what is beneath." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Interest, perhaps, or the reflexive ache of being reminded that she once had secrets too. Tom watched that flicker the way a predator watched the twitch of prey. "Do you know," he asked, careful as a surgeon, "of things that were lost and never found?" The portraits murmured. Somewhere in the corridor, a candle hissed as wax spilled. The Grey Lady drifted a fraction closer, her veil-like hair shifting without wind. "There are many lost things," she said. "Some are better left lost." Tom's smile did not reach his eyes. "I have always been good at finding what others misplace." She studied him, and in her gaze Tom felt the weight of centuries, of betrayal and regret. He did not flinch. "The founders argued," she said at last, her voice like distant bells. "They hid their quarrels in stone and spell. They thought it would save the school. It did not." Tom let the words settle, his mind already turning them like coins. "But it could save it now," he said softly, as if thinking aloud. "If the right person held the right secret." The Grey Lady's face tightened. "You speak like a man who thinks he is that person." Tom's eyes were steady. "I speak like a man who knows there will be chaos," he replied. "War changes people. It makes them fearful. Fear makes them desperate. Desperate people will follow whoever seems certain. And you want them to follow you," she whispered. Tom did not deny it. Denial was for those who feared judgment. "I want Hogwarts to be strong," he said, and allowed the statement to be true in his own twisted way. Stronger than the world outside it, stronger than the ministry, stronger than the foolishness of children. The Grey Lady drifted back, as if the air around him had grown colder. "Strength," she said, "is not always what you think." Tom watched her retreat, the corridor's shadows swallowing her pale form. He had not gotten what he wanted, not yet. But he had confirmed something more valuable. She could be moved. She could be prodded. Even ghosts had sore places. Behind him, Abraxas exhaled shakily. Gaius's eyes remained on Tom, wary, and impressed. Tom turned away, his mind already reaching downward beneath the stone. There were secrets in the castle that the living guarded with spells, and the dead guarded with silence. Tom had never been patient with either. Transfiguration was a subject that rewarded discipline and punished arrogance. Many students hated it for that. Tom loved it because it was honest. It required you to understand a thing's nature, to impose will upon it, and to accept that failure had consequences. Albus Dumbledore moved among the desks, as if he belonged to the room in a way the rest of them never would. His robes were plain, his sleeves rolled up, chalk dust faint on his fingers. There was nothing performative about him. That was what made him dangerous. Performers could be predicted. Tom watched him with the same careful attention he gave to locked doors and whispered rumors. The professor's eyes were bright behind half-moon spectacles, and when he looked at a student it felt like being seen too clearly. Tom had learned early to provide people with what they expected to find. With Albus, that was more difficult. The man expected too little of appearances and too much of substance. "Today," Albus said, "we'll be continuing with cross-species transfigurations. I remind you, this is not a game of making amusing pets. It is the manipulation of living matter. If you are careless, you may do harm you cannot undo." Several students shivered, though the classroom was warm. Tom did not. Carelessness was a flaw he did not indulge. Albus stopped beside Tom's desk, watching as Tom lifted his wand and focused on a small teacup. The cup was ordinary, silver, slightly dented, the kind that came from the kitchens. Under Tom's gaze, it began to shift, the metal softening, reshaping. A handle lengthened and became a tail. The rim narrowed into a snout. In less than a minute, a small, sleek mouse sat where the teacup had been, whiskers twitching. The transformation was nearly perfect. Nearly. Albus's gaze sharpened. "Good," he said quietly. But you've left something behind." Tom's eyes flicked to the mouse's ears. They were slightly too thin, a hint of metallic sheen at the edges. It would have passed most inspections. It did not pass Albus. Tom's mouth curved into a polite, controlled expression. "I'll correct it," he said. "I'm sure you will." Albus's tone was mild, but his eyes remained fixed on Tom's. "Tell me, Tom, why do you think transfiguration is regulated?" Tom considered. The class's quills scratched. Other students pretended not to listen. They always listened. "Because," Tom said, "people fear what they cannot control." Albus smiled faintly, as if amused by the truth and saddened by what lay beneath it. "Perhaps," he said. "Or because power without restraint invites cruelty." Tom held Albus' gaze. "Restraint is a choice," he replied. "Some choices are inefficient." Albus's smile did not deepen. "Efficiency is not the highest virtue," he said. "It is simply the one most commonly used to excuse harm." Tom inclined his head, the movement respectful enough to be unassailable. Inside, something cold tightened. Albus was not fooled by surfaces. He did not hunger for flattery. He did not fear names. He was, in his own way, immune to many of Tom's usual tools. As Albus moved on, Tom corrected the mouse's ears with a flick of his wand, perfecting the transformation. The mouse scampered off the desk and vanished under a classmate's chair, causing a startled squeal. The other students laughed. Albus spoke a gentle reprimand. The moment passed as if it were nothing. But Tom had felt it, the professor's attention lingering like a hand on the back of his neck. Albus had asked about cruelty, about restraint. He had placed a word, harm, between them like a warning stone in the path. Tom kept his face calm. A lesser mind would have been rattled. Tom was not lesser. If Albus meant to watch him, then Tom would give him something to watch. A flawless student, a model prefect, a boy whose every visible action was beyond reproach. The castle, however, had places where even Albus's gaze did not reach. And beneath those stones, something breathed. By December, the castle had settled into its winter mood. Frost veined the windows. Snow gathered in drifts along the courtyard walls like pale ghosts. The lake above the Slytherin common room pressed cold and dark against the glass, occasionally lit from above by the shadow of a passing creature, huge and slow. In the great hall, the floating candles burned steady against the drafts, their wax never dripping, their flames never wavering. Food appeared in excess, the way Hogwarts always provided. Platters of roast, bowls of steaming vegetables, sweet tarts glistening with glaze. It should have felt like comfort. Instead, the laughter at the tables carried an edge, as if everyone were aware that comfort could be temporary. Tom ate neatly, speaking little, letting others fill the silence. Abraxas leaned toward him, voice low. The Ravenclaw prefect has been meeting with a group in the astronomy corridor. They call it a safety committee. Ridiculous. Tom's eyes remained on his plate. Nah, ridiculous, he murmured. Predictable. Tristan smirked. They think the war will reach us. It already has, Tom said, and allowed the statement to hang. Fear is the war's true weapon. It doesn't need to cross borders. Cassius's gaze flicked toward the staff table. The teachers are distracted, he whispered. They've been receiving owls. There was a meeting last night. I heard the word ministry and something about evacuation. Tom's fork paused. Evacuation of whom? Cassius hesitated. Muggle-borns, he admitted, as if confessing a sin. Some families are frightened. They think. He swallowed. They think they'll be targeted. Tom chewed slowly, his face calm, his mind sparking. Targeted. The word carried promise. Not of violence. Violence was blunt, but of movement. If people began to leave, if the school's population shifted, if the teachers became preoccupied with protecting the vulnerable, then corridors would open, attention would waver, and the castle's usual rhythms could be bent. At the staff table, Horace laughed loudly at something, cheeks flushed with wine. Albus sat beside him, hands folded, listening more than speaking. The headmaster, aged, genial, easily pleased by appearances, beamed at a group of students who'd been praised for their charms work. The other professors wore the tired expressions of adults trying to keep a world stable for children who did not know what stability truly cost. Tom watched them all with the dispassionate focus of someone studying a puzzle. Gaius spoke quietly, almost without moving his lips. The Gryffindor keeper's apprentice has been in the kitchens late. He's asking for meat, raw. Tom's gaze slid toward the Gryffindor table. A large boy with unruly hair laughed too loudly, his hands as big as dinner plates. He looked out of place in uniform, like something half-wild forced into cloth. Tom felt no irritation, only interest. A boy like that had problems. Problems were openings. Find out why, Tom murmured. Gaius nodded. The choir of carols began at the far end of the hall, voices rising. Snowflakes drifted down from the enchanted ceiling, dissolving before they touched the food. Students clapped, some of them genuinely delighted. Tom's smile was faint, almost convincing. He could play this part forever if he wished. The brilliant student, the charming prefect, the boy who made teachers proud. But beneath the surface, the year was turning towards something darker. Something that had been waiting in the stone long before any of these children existed. Tom felt it like a pulse. He lifted his goblet and took a sip, the warmth of the drink spreading through him. Around him, his circle leaned in, hungry for instruction. We'll begin after the holiday, Tom said softly, when everyone thinks they're safe. They met in a room that most students avoided, not because it was forbidden, but because it was unpleasant. The air smelled faintly of mildewed dottar. A corner of the ceiling had cracked, and when the wind struck the outer wall just right, dust sifted down like ash. Old desks sat stacked against one wall, their wood scarred with generations of bored knives. Tom preferred it for precisely those reasons. Unpleasant places were often empty places. A stolen brazier warmed the center of the room, its flame small but steady. The light carved his followers' faces into stark planes. Abraxas pale and intent, Cassius jittery, Tristan trying to look fearless, Gaius unreadable. Tom spoke without raising his voice. "This is not a club," he said. "Not a game. Not something you whisper about to impress girls." Cassius swallowed. "No, Tom?" "Good." Tom paced slowly, the hem of his robe brushing dust. "The school is full of soft people who think rules are morality. They think goodness is obeying what they're told. But rules are just the will of someone else, written down." Tristan lifted his chin. "And we won't be soft." Tom stopped in front of him. "You will be useful," he corrected. "Softness is irrelevant. Usefulness is what matters." Tristan's jaw clenched. "Yes." Tom's gaze moved across all of them. "Each of you has a family name that people respect," he said. "They fear your fathers. They envy your houses. But here, in this room, those names mean nothing unless they serve me." Abraxas's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in calculation. "Serve you how?" Tom smiled faintly. "By understanding that I am not asking," he said. The brazier crackled. Outside, wind clawed at the castle. The room felt like a pocket cut out of the world, a private chamber beneath a larger kingdom. Tom reached into his robe and withdrew the plain diary. The cover looked almost laughable in the firelight, cheap, unadorned. Cassius blinked. "That's it? That's what you brought us here to see?" Tom's gaze chilled. Cassius immediately looked down. "This," Tom said, "will remember what you do here. It will remember what you swear. And if you ever forget your place, it will remind you." He did not explain how. Explanation invited questions. Questions invited doubt. Tom opened the diary. The pages were blank. He tore out a sheet with calm precision, as if removing a piece of skin from a body that did not bleed. He held the page over the brazier. For a moment, the paper did not catch. Then the flame licked up, greedily consuming it. As it burned, the air shifted. It was subtle, like the moment before a storm breaks. The flame in the brazier flared, and shadows jumped across their faces. Gaius's eyes sharpened. "What did you do?" Tom closed the diary. "I made a promise," he said softly. "The kind that has consequences." Abraxas leaned forward, captivated. "And us?" Tom held the diary out. "Touch it," he instructed. One by one they did. Their fingers brushed the cover like a sacrament. Tom watched their reactions with clinical interest. No lightning struck. No blood spilled. The drama would come later. When all four had touched it, Tom withdrew it and slipped it away. "Now," he said, "you will do exactly what I tell you." Cassius's voice was shaky. "What's the first thing?" Tom's smile was thin. "We make the school need me," he said. "We create a danger only I can name. And then when they look around for someone steady, they'll find me standing in the right place." "Nani, one day. Bisyani bear, wa." Tristan exhaled, exhilarated. "What danger?" Tom turned toward the cracked wall, toward the ancient stone that seemed to listen. "Something old," he said, and his voice took on a note that was almost reverent. "Something that belongs to this castle more than any of them ever will." In the silence that followed, the air seemed to draw inward, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Tom felt the pulse beneath his feet, faint but real. He did not need to tell them that he could already hear it more clearly than any of them could. That a voice, somewhere deep, was waiting for him to speak back in a language older than fear. The lavatory was always empty at night. Even ghosts avoided it, drifting past with faint distaste, as if the place held too much of other people's misery. The air was damp, tinged with the sour scent of standing water and neglect. Tiles cracked beneath their shoes. The sinks were stained with age. Tom knelt beside one of them, fingers tracing the faint carving on the porcelain. A serpent curled around the metal drain, delicate and almost invisible unless you knew to look. It was the kind of detail a careless person would dismiss as decoration. Tom did not dismiss anything. Abraxas stood at the door, listening for footsteps. Cassius hovered near him, pale and sweating. Tristan and Gaius stood farther back, as if afraid the air near Tom might bite. Tom lowered his face toward the sink and spoke, soft and sibilant. The words slid out of him like something born there, not learned. The sound was not English. It was a hiss and a whisper and a promise made by teeth. The sink shuddered. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the porcelain began to move, sinking into itself like melting wax. Metal groaned. The pipework twisted. A hole yawned open where the drain had been, dark and round and deep enough to swallow the light. Cassius made a strangled sound. "Merlin?" Tristan stared, eyes wide. "Tom, what is that?" Tom rose slowly, his robes untouched by the damp. He looked down into the opening, and the darkness below seemed to look back. A faint, cold draft breathed up from it, carrying a scent like old stone and something else. Something reptilian, dry, and patient. "A mouth," Tom said quietly. "A way down." Abraxas's voice trembled despite his efforts. "Is it?" "The chamber," Tom said, and even he felt a thrill at speaking the word. It was not joy. It was recognition, like finding the outline of his own face carved into a wall centuries before he was born. Gaius's gaze flicked to Tom. "How did you?" Tom cut him off with a glance. "It's not important how," he said. "It's important what we do with it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew his wand. The tip glowed faintly, a cold green light that slid down into the hole without filling it. The darkness swallowed illumination as if hungry. From below, far down, came a sound. It was faint, almost imagined. A soft scrape, a slow drag, then a whisper, thin as breath through cracks. Cassius' face went ashen. "Something's down there." Tom's eyes did not leave the hole. "Yes," he said. The whisper rose again, clearer now. Not words, at least not to the others. But to Tom, it carried shape, meaning, a presence, ancient and enormous, turning in its sleep. He leaned closer and spoke again, his voice a ribbon of hiss. The air responded. The opening seemed to widen, inviting. Abraxas gripped the doorframe. "Tom, maybe we should come back with what?" Tom asked softly, not turning. "A professor? A permission slip?" Abraxas fell silent. Tom straightened and looked at them. In the greenish light, his face was calm, handsome, almost saintly. Only his eyes betrayed the hunger beneath. "We're not going down tonight," he said. "Not yet. The first time we open it, it must matter. It must change something." Tristan swallowed hard. "You're going to use it?" Tom's smile was barely there. "I'm going to show the castle who its heir is," he said. "And then I'm going to show the school who they should obey." He flicked his wand. The sink reformed, sliding back into place as if it had never moved. The hole vanished. The lavatory returned to its miserable emptiness, leaving only the faint dampness in the air as proof. Cassius exhaled shakily, as if he'd been holding his breath for hours. "No one will believe us." Tom looked toward the door, toward the corridor, toward the sleeping school above them. "They don't have to," he said. "They only have to believe what I let them see." The first victim did not scream. That was the most unsettling part. They found her in the corridor near the marble staircase, lying on her side as if she'd simply tripped and fallen. One arm was stretched toward the wall, fingers curled as though grasping for balance. Her eyes were open, fixed on something no one else could see. For a moment, the crowd that gathered around her did not understand. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it was a prank. Then a boy leaned down, touched her shoulder, and recoiled as if her skin had burned him. She's cold," he stammered. The laughter died. Whispers rose like insects. Teachers arrived quickly, robes billowing, wands drawn. They pushed students back with sharp commands. "The girl, Only a fourth-year Muggle-born. Her name on everyone's lips now in pieces. Did not move, did not blink. Tom arrived with measured speed. Not too fast to appear eager, not too slow to seem indifferent. He knelt near the girl, his expression perfectly controlled into concern. He did not touch her. Touching could be risky. He leaned close enough to see the faint gray pallor, the unnatural stillness. He knew exactly what had happened. He had heard the scrape beneath the stone. He had spoken the words. He had guided the ancient hunger into a corridor, and then guided it away again, like leading a beast on a leash only he could hold. Around him, students trembled. Some cried. Others stared, fascinated by terror. "Stand back," a professor snapped, waving her wand. A faintly shimmering charm settled over the girl like invisible glass. "What did this?" someone whispered. "Curse," another answered. "Has to be." Tom looked up, letting his eyes sweep over the crowd. He saw fear blooming like rot. He saw opportunity. Abraxas moved at Tom's unspoken command, placing himself between the crowd and the victim, his voice surprisingly steady as he barked, "Back. Give them space." Cassius hovered behind him, face pale. Tristan's eyes shone with a dangerous mix of awe and exhilaration. Gaius watched everything, as though memorizing. The professors murmured to each other in urgent tones. Words drifted. "Petrified, not dead, no sign of hex." Someone mentioned mandrakes. Someone mentioned the hospital wing. Tom listened without appearing to. He had already planned for this. Petrification was clean. It created panic without finality. It made people desperate for solutions without giving them grief sharp enough to demand justice. A familiar laugh rang out, far too loud, and the poltergeist swooped overhead, cackling. "Oh, what fun!" it shrieked. "What dreadful fun!" A professor shouted it away. The poltergeist fled, still laughing. Tom rose slowly. He let his face show the smallest tremor of unease, the kind that would make him look human. "We should escort younger students in pairs," he said quietly, as if offering help. "No one should walk alone until we know what's happening." The suggestion landed. Students nodded rapidly, desperate for structure. A Ravenclaw prefect seized on it, repeating it loudly to the crowd as if it had been his own thought. Tom allowed it. The idea mattered, not the credit. Teachers moved the petrified girl, levitating her gently. Students watched, silent, their faces pale in torchlight. The corridor felt suddenly narrower, the stone walls pressing in like a tomb. As the crowd began to disperse, Tom caught a glimpse of Albus at the far end of the corridor. The professor's face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, taking in details. When his gaze met Tom's, there was no accusation there, only wary attention, as if he were watching a chessboard and noticing a piece that had moved in an unexpected way. Tom held the gaze for a heartbeat, then looked away first, as a polite student would. Inside, something tightened and thrilled. Let Albus watch. Watching was not stopping. The school had tasted fear. Now it would crave someone to lead it out of fear. Tom was already stepping into the shape of that role, as naturally as if the castle itself had carved him for it. The summons came 2 nights later. Tom entered the headmaster's office with the precise posture of a boy who had been taught manners, though no one had taught him anything he hadn't chosen to learn. The room smelled of old parchment and smoke from the fireplace. Rain struck the windows with steady insistence, turning the glass into moving shadows. Armando Dippet sat behind the desk, his face lined with worry. Letters lay scattered before him, some bearing seals, some torn open so violently the edges had split. A few were from parents, their handwriting frantic. Others were stamped with ministry marks. "Tom," Armando said, and the use of his first name felt like an attempt at warmth. "Sit down, please." Tom sat, hands folded in his lap. He did not fidget. He did not look around too obviously at the instruments perched on shelves, the portraits watching with painted curiosity. He waited, patient, as if his time belonged to the school. Armando exhaled. You've heard about the attacks. Yes, Tom said softly. The students are frightened. They are, Armando agreed, rubbing his temples. Parents are sending owls every hour. Some are threatening to remove their children. The governors, he broke off, swallowing. The governors are demanding assurances. Tom let silence stretch. Adults hated silence. It made them feel it. Armando looked up, his eyes searching Tom's face as though hoping to find comfort there. You're a prefect, he said. You're respected. Students listen to you. Tom lowered his gaze slightly, the gesture of a humble boy. I try to do my duty. Armando nodded, seizing on the phrase. Duty. I need help keeping order, he said. I need the prefects to be vigilant, to enforce curfew strictly, to keep students from wandering. Nah. Tom looked up, meeting Armando's eyes. Of course, he said. But curfew isn't enough. Armando blinked. What do you mean? Tom leaned forward slightly, as if confiding. Fear spreads when people feel powerless, he said. If we give them structure, patrols, escorts for younger students, clear instructions, they'll feel safer. They'll be less likely to panic. Armando's expression softened with relief. Yes, he said quickly. Yes, that makes sense. Tom allowed the headmaster to believe it was his own conclusion. I can organize it, Tom offered. Discreetly, without alarming anyone further. Armando hesitated, then nodded. Do it, he said, as though granting Tom authority that should have belonged to staff. Thank you, Tom. Truly. Tom rose. We all want Hogwarts to remain open, he said, voice warm with apparent loyalty. We can't let hysteria close it. Armando's shoulders slumped. No, he murmured. We can't. As Tom turned to leave, a portrait near the door cleared its painted throat. Clever boy, the portrait said, voice dripping with skepticism. Clever, clever. Tom paused, looking at the painted face. Good evening, he said politely. The portrait's eyes narrowed. Manners don't make a man good. Tom smiled faintly. No, he said, and left before the portrait could say more. In the corridor outside, the air was colder. Tom walked slowly, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by thick stone. Behind him, Armando sat in his office with his letters and worries, comforted by the idea that a brilliant student would help hold the school together. Tom's lips curved slightly in the darkness. It had taken so little. A suggestion, a calm voice. An adult desperate to hand responsibility to someone who seemed capable. He did not need Armando's title. He only needed Armando's permission. Now the corridors belonged to him. Once the patrols began, the castle changed its tone. Students walked in pairs or small groups, heads bent, voices hushed. Even laughter sounded guilty, as if joy itself were a risk. Prefects were suddenly everywhere, at staircases, near doorways, outside the Great Hall after dinner. They checked corridors, enforced curfew, escorted first years with the air of soldiers guiding civilians through a siege. And at the center of it, always, was Tom. He did not bark orders. He did not swagger. He simply appeared where he was needed, calm as a candle flame that refused to gutter. When a Hufflepuff burst into tears after hearing a rumor, Tom guided her to a bench and spoke to her quietly until she could breathe again. When a group of boys tried to sneak to the kitchens after curfew, Tom caught them and sent them back with a disappointed look that made them feel ashamed to have disappointed him. Students began to repeat his suggestions as if they were rules. They began to seek him out in corridors, asking what they should do, where they should go, whether it was safe to visit the library alone. Tom gave them answers. Answers were addictive. Behind him, Abraxas walked like a shadow, learning how it felt to be feared without doing anything at all. Tristan enjoyed it too much, his grin too quick, his eyes too sharp. Cassius clung to lists and schedules as if they were lifelines, his hands always slightly trembling. Gaius watched, always watching, his expression careful. What if it happens again? A Ravenclaw girl asked Tom one evening, clutching her books to her chest. Tom's voice was gentle. Then we'll handle it, he said. You're not alone. The girl nodded, comforted. She did not notice the way Tom's eyes flicked to the corridor behind her, calculating angles, distances, the time it would take a teacher to arrive if someone screamed. He could feel the school's collective anxiety tightening into a knot, and he could feel himself positioned at the center of it, fingers slowly closing. It was not merely the patrols. It was the subtle rules he began to shape. Certain corridors were discouraged, for safety. Certain staircases were avoided. Certain teachers were quietly spoken of as unreliable or distracted. Tom never said those things outright. He simply allowed questions to hang in the air until someone else filled them with suspicion. Students began to say, Tom thinks we should, as if Tom were a professor. Teachers noticed, of course. Some found it comforting. Some found it unsettling. Horace clapped Tom on the shoulder one afternoon, laughing. Look at you, he boomed. You're keeping everyone in line better than the staff. Tom smiled modestly. I'm only doing what I can, he replied. Albus watched from across the corridor, his eyes unreadable. He did not interrupt. He did not praise. He simply observed, as though weighing something. The second attack came on a night when the wind howled so fiercely the windows rattled in their frames. A boy was found near the trophy room, stiff as stone, his mouth open as if he'd tried to scream and failed. This time, the panic was faster, sharper. Students screamed anyway, a chain of sound that echoed through the corridors like a warning bell. Tom arrived before most teachers. He forced the crowd back with calm authority, his voice cutting through chaos. Back, he said, not shouting. Give him air. Don't touch him. They obeyed. As teachers hurried in, wands raised, Tom stepped aside, letting them take over. He watched their faces, their fear, their uncertainty. When the victim was levitated away, Tom turned to the assembled students and spoke softly. Stay with your partners, he said. Go straight to your dormitories. We'll increase patrols. We'll keep you safe. They nodded, desperate. They moved as he directed, as though his words were ropes guiding them out of a dark place. That night, Tom returned to the abandoned lavatory alone. He stood before the sink with the serpent carving, listening. The whisper below was clearer now, a restless stirring. He spoke, and the sink opened. The air that rose from the hole was colder than winter. It smelled of stone that had never seen sunlight. Tom leaned in, speaking in that hissing tongue, and the whisper answered him, stronger, like a creature turning its head toward its master. Soon, Tom thought, they would not merely obey him because they were afraid. They would obey him because he would prove he was the only one who could end the fear. He closed the sink again, leaving the secret sealed beneath porcelain and silence. Above him, the school trembled, and Tom smiled in the dark. The defense classroom felt different now. It always had an edge. Students casting spells at targets, learning to block, to dodge, to think quickly. But the attacks had sharpened it into something almost desperate. Galatea Merrythought moved among them with crisp authority, her hair pinned back, her eyes sharp. She tolerated no whining, no excuses. Again, she snapped at a boy whose shield charm flickered. If your focus breaks when you're nervous, you'll be dead when it matters. The word dead hung in the air like smoke. Several students swallowed hard. Tom performed flawlessly. His shield charm was clean, bright, unbroken. His counter curses landed with precise economy. He did not show off. He did not duel with unnecessary flourish. He simply did what was required perfectly. Galatea paused by his station, watching as his spell struck a practice dummy and sent it skittering back. Very good, she said, grudging approval in her tone. You have control. Control. The word pleased Tom more than praise ever could. Thank you, he said. From the back of the room, Albus watched with arms folded. The professor's gaze moved not only over Tom's spells, but over Tom's face, his posture, the small details of how he reacted when others faltered, or when Galatea's criticism stung. Tom felt that attention like heat against his skin. He did not let it show. Galatea clapped her hands sharply. "Partner up," she ordered. "I want to see you block under pressure. No mercy. If you get hit, you learn." Students shuffled, nervous. Tom's partners always approached him with a mix of dread and excitement. This time, a Gryffindor stepped forward, jaw set, eyes bright with stubborn courage. Tom greeted him politely, wand held low. They bowed. They began. The Gryffindor attacked with raw energy, spells thrown like punches. Tom blocked each one with minimal movement, his shield flaring briefly and then vanishing. He did not retreat. He let the Gryffindor exhaust himself, then disarmed him with a single flick. The Gryffindor's wand flew across the room and clattered against a desk. The boy's face flushed, humiliated. Galatea's mouth twitched. "Again," she said. Tom waited. When the Gryffindor attacked a second time, angrier, Tom let one spell skim close enough to singe his sleeve. Gasps rose from nearby students. Tom's eyes flicked to his sleeve, then back to his opponent, calm. He disarmed him again. This time, he stepped closer and said quietly, "Your anger makes you predictable." The Gryffindor glared, breathing hard. "At least I'm not," he began, then stopped, as if suddenly aware of the room listening. Tom's smile was faint. "Not what?" he prompted, gentle as a knife. Galatea barked. "Enough. Take your seat." The Gryffindor stalked away. Tom returned to his place without comment. Albus's gaze held Tom's for a moment. Something passed between them, an unspoken recognition. Tom could not read it fully. It irritated him. After class, as students filed out, Galatea spoke to Albus near the door. Their voices were low, but Tom caught fragments as he lingered near his bag. "Can't keep pretending it's nothing," Galatea said sharply. Albus's reply was calm. "No," he said. "We can't." Tom left the classroom quietly, the conversation sliding into the back of his mind. Teachers were speaking to each other now with the kind of urgency that made them careless. They were being forced into reaction. Reaction made adults clumsy. In the corridor, students clustered in knots, whispering rumors. Someone said the monster had been seen. Someone claimed it lived in the walls. Someone said the castle was cursed and would swallow them all before spring. Tom moved among them like a calm current through rough water. He offered reassurance. He offered structure. He offered the illusion of certainty. And beneath it all, he could feel the old presence stirring more impatiently. The beast under the school wanted blood. Tom did not blame it. Hunger was honest. What mattered was whose hand held the leash. The night Myrtle Warren died, the castle felt too quiet, as if even the portraits had learned to hold their tongues. Tom found her where he expected to find her, in the abandoned lavatory, hunched by a sink, her shoulders shaking with sobs she tried to swallow. She was a small girl with a sharp voice when she was angry and a softer one when she was hurt. Tom had watched her for weeks, noting her habits the way he noted everyone's. She argued often. She cried easily. She was, most importantly, alone. He entered without making much sound. Myrtle did not look up at first. "Go away," she said thickly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm sick of everyone." Tom's voice was gentle. "I'm not here to bother you," he said. "I'm here because it isn't safe to be alone." Myrtle gave a harsh laugh. "Oh, because you care." She looked up then, her face blotchy, eyes red. "You're Tom. Everyone knows you. Everyone thinks you're perfect." Tom allowed a shadow of sympathy to touch his features. "Perfection is exhausting," he said softly. And the lie was believable because it was shaped like truth. "I know what it's like to be watched." Myrtle sniffed, suspicious. "Do you?" Tom stepped closer, careful, his shoes avoiding the puddles. "People can be cruel," he said, voice low. "Especially when they're frightened, but you don't deserve to be their target." Myrtle's eyes filled again, as if the kindness stabbed her. "They said," she began, then choked. "They said it's my fault, because I'm not." Tom listened, head slightly tilted, as though absorbing her pain. Inside, he calculated. He did not need Myrtle to confess anything. He needed her to stay in this room, in this moment, long enough. "I heard someone say something in the corridor," Myrtle whispered, voice shaking. "Something, hissing, like a snake. I thought it was a prank. I came in here because I couldn't stand them laughing at me." Tom's pulse quickened, not with fear but with anticipation. "Did you see anyone?" he asked softly. Myrtle shook her head. "No, just, I heard it." Tom moved toward the sink with the serpent carving. His wand was already in his hand, hidden by his sleeve. Myrtle watched him, confused. "What are you doing?" Tom did not answer in English. He lowered his face toward the sink and spoke in that other tongue, the sounds slipping through the air like a secret being unlocked. The sink shuddered. Myrtle's eyes widened. "Tom." The porcelain shifted, opening into darkness. A cold draft rose. Myrtle stumbled back, her heels slipping on wet tile. "What is that?" she gasped, voice cracking. Tom turned to her, his face calm. "Stay behind me," he said, and the command was instinctive. Myrtle obeyed without thinking, clutching her hands to her chest. From below came a sound like stone grinding against stone. The whispering hiss rose louder now, more eager. Tom spoke again, his voice shaping the darkness. Something moved. A presence surged up, immense and ancient. Tom did not see it fully. He did not need to. He felt the sudden shift of air, the heavy slide of something enormous. Myrtle's breath caught. She took a step sideways, toward the cracked stall doors. Her eyes flicked past Tom, toward something that rose in the shadows, something that did not belong in any room meant for children. She opened her mouth to scream. Tom's mind flashed through the plan, the panic, the closure threat, the scapegoat. Myrtle's scream would ruin nothing. It would only make the outcome more dramatic. But when the scream died before it was born, when Myrtle's eyes went wide and fixed and her body stiffened like a puppet whose strings had snapped, a flicker of something unexpected ran through Tom. Not remorse. Not grief. A sharp, cold awareness of finality. Myrtle fell without a sound, her body hitting the tile with a dull, wet thud. Her eyes remained open, staring at nothing. For a heartbeat, Tom stood utterly still. The air smelled of damp stone and something musky, reptilian. The darkness in the sink churned with the retreating weight of the beast. Tom looked down at Myrtle's small, still body. He had intended fear, not death, not yet. But death had come anyway, swift and irreversible. He felt, deep inside, a strange tearing sensation, like fabric ripping. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it left him colder. Then he breathed out, slow and controlled, and the moment passed. Death was an event. Events could be used. Tom knelt beside Myrtle, placing 2 fingers lightly against her neck as if checking for a pulse. He did not need to. He knew. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Someone had heard something. Perhaps only the sink's groan. Perhaps the absence of Myrtle's usual noisy sobs. Tom rose. His face shifted into shock and horror with flawless precision. He backed away from the body, as if afraid to touch death. When the first teacher burst through the door, wand raised, Tom's voice broke convincingly. "Professor," he gasped. "Sheesh, Jed." The teacher stared at Myrtle, then at Tom, pale with sudden dread. "What happened?" Tom's eyes filled with the right kind of fear. "I don't know," he said, and the lie slid out as smoothly as silk. "I heard something. I came to see. And then..." He let his voice falter. Adults filled falters with their own conclusions. Behind the teacher, more footsteps came, more voices, rising and sharp. The castle woke around the death like a beast startled from sleep. Tom stepped back into the corner, making himself small, making himself the tragic witness. In his pocket, the plain diary felt suddenly heavier, as if it had absorbed the moment like ink. Outside, the school's fear would become a storm, and Tom would stand at the center of it, holding an umbrella no one else could see. The school wanted a culprit the way a drowning man wanted air. Myrtle's death tipped the fear into something sharper, heavier. Parents' owls arrived in frantic flocks. The corridors filled with rumor and accusation. Teachers spoke in tight groups, their voices low, their faces grim. The word closure hovered over everything like an executioner's hood. Tom let the panic build. He let it fill the lungs of the castle until people could not breathe without tasting it. Then, at the right moment, he offered them a target. He chose Rubeus Hagrid because the choice was perfect. Too large, too strange, too obviously out of place in a school that pretended it was only for polite, tidy magic. People were already predisposed to fear him. Fear needed only a push. Tom found Rubeus near the kitchens, just as Gaius had predicted, a bundle of raw meat hidden in his arms. The boy's face was red, not with guilt but with distress, as if he carried a burden too heavy for his age. "What have you got there?" Tom asked quietly, stepping into the corridor. Rubeus froze. His eyes flicked down to the meat, then back up, wide and pleading. "Nothing," he muttered, and the lie was painfully obvious. Tom's voice softened. "You know the school is frightened," he said. "You know they're looking for something to blame." Rubeus's breath hitched. "I didn't do nothing," he said quickly. "I swear." Tom studied him, letting silence press. "Show me," he said. Rubeus hesitated, then turned as if to flee. He was fast for his size, but Tom was faster in a different way. Tom's wand was already raised, a simple binding charm catching Rubeus' ankle, tripping him hard. Rubeus hit the stone with a shout, the meat spilling across the floor. He scrambled, panicked. "Please," he gasped. "Please, Tom." Tom kept his face calm. "I'll make it worse," he said. Teachers arrived, summoned by Tom's quick message, delivered by a younger student eager to be useful. They came with wands drawn, eyes wary. They saw Rubeus on the floor, the raw meat, the panic. "What is this?" a professor demanded. Tom looked up, his expression strained with reluctant duty. "He's been feeding something," Tom said, voice tight. "In the forest. I suspected. After the attacks, I followed him." "Now." Rubeus shook his head violently, tears spilling. "No," he sobbed. "No, it's not. He's my friend." "A friend," Tom repeated softly, as if the word itself were proof of danger. "What kind of friend needs raw meat in secret?" The professor's face hardened. "Where?" she snapped. Rubeus made a broken sound, his shoulders shaking. "Please," he whispered. "They'll kill him." Tom's eyes narrowed just slightly, in the guise of compassion. "If you care about the school," he said, "tell them." Rubeus squeezed his eyes shut. "In the forest," he choked. "In a hollow by the old yew." The teachers exchanged grim glances. They hauled Rubeus to his feet, his hands bound by magic, his face streaked with tears. Tom led them to the forest's edge. The trees rose like dark pillars, their branches clawing at the gray sky. The air smelled of damp earth and rot. The wind in the leaves sounded like whispers. They went in, wands raised, light spells glowing at their tips. Rubeus stumbled beside them, sobbing under his breath, calling someone's name in a trembling voice. They found the hollow. They found the thick webbing clinging to roots, pale strands like cords. They found the glint of too many eyes in the darkness. A massive spider shifted, its legs scraping against bark. Its body was the size of a large dog, its fangs gleaming wetly. The teachers recoiled, shouting, spells flaring. Rubeus cried out, voice breaking. "Aragog! No! The spider hissed, a sound that made skin crawl. Tom stood very still, watching the teacher's horror sharpen into certainty. A beast in the forest. A student feeding it. Secrets. Danger. It fit the shape they needed. The professor nearest Tom turned, face tight with anger and fear. You, she snapped at Rubeus. You brought this here. Rubeus shook his head frantically. He never hurt nobody, he sobbed. He never. Enough, another teacher barked. The school has a dead girl. We are not indulging your creatures. Tom's voice was quiet, almost regretful. I didn't want it to be him, he said, and the lie was delivered with such sincerity that even he felt almost proud of it. The teachers dragged Rubeus back toward the castle. Behind them, spells crackled in the hollow as they tried to drive the spider deeper into the trees. The forest swallowed the noise greedily, indifferent. Rubeus looked back once, his face crumpled with grief. Tom met his gaze. For a moment, something passed between them. Rubeus' helpless betrayal and Tom's absolute, cold intent. Then Tom looked away, already moving on. The school would seize this explanation like a drowning man seizing a rope. The teachers would act quickly, relieved to have something to punish. Armando would cling to it as proof that the danger was found and ended. And the true monster beneath the school would return to sleep at Tom's command, leaving no proof behind. Rubeus would be expelled. The school would remain open. Tom would be praised for his service. Control, Tom thought, was not always taken with force. Sometimes it was taken with a story. The castle exhaled, slowly, like a body easing after pain. The attack stopped. Rumors shifted from terror to gossip, from panic to righteous satisfaction. Students whispered about Rubeus as if he had always been guilty, as if they had always known something was wrong with him. People loved to believe they had been correct all along. It made fear feel like wisdom. Rubeus was gone from the dormitories. His bed in the Gryffindor tower stood empty, sheets stripped. The forest was quieter too, as if the trees themselves had accepted the offering. Tom walked through the corridors with a composed air that invited praise. Teachers nodded at him. Students smiled at him with relief and admiration. Armando called him into the office again, thanking him with the earnest gratitude of a man desperate to believe the worst had passed. And then, in the space between two classes, Albus found him. It was not dramatic. There was no crowd, no raised voice. Albus simply waited in a corridor near an empty classroom, as if he had been standing there for hours without moving. The late afternoon light from the windows turned dust into gold. Tom approached, slowing as he recognized the professor. "Sir," Tom said politely. Albus's eyes rested on him with unsettling calm. "Tom," he said, and the use of the name felt like a weight. Tom smiled faintly. "I heard Rubeus will be sent to the ministry for questioning," he said, as if discussing unfortunate weather. "I hope the truth will be clear." Albus tilted his head. "Do you?" he asked. Tom's smile did not change. "Of course." Albus's gaze held Tom's. Silence stretched, long enough for the castle to listen. A portrait nearby pretended to doze, its painted eyelids lowered. "You've been very helpful," Albus said at last. "I only did what any student should," Tom replied, voice modest. Albus's mouth softened slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "No?" he said quietly. "You did what you chose." Tom felt something cold and sharp, like the edge of a blade, slide under his ribs. He kept his posture relaxed. "I'm not sure what you mean." Albus stepped closer, not threatening, simply present. "You're a remarkable boy," he said. "Remarkable in ways that go beyond homework and prefect duties." Tom let a hint of confusion show, just enough to be plausible. "Thank you." Albus's eyes did not blink. "I think you know very well," he said softly, "that you have a talent for influencing people." Tom's expression remained serene. "I try to be kind." Albus's gaze sharpened. "Kindness," he said, is not the same as charm. For a moment, the corridor felt colder. Tom could hear distant footsteps, far away, the muffled sound of students moving between lessons. The world continued, oblivious. Tom's voice stayed smooth. I'm afraid I still don't understand what you're accusing me of. Albus's face did not harden. Accusing, he repeated, and there was a faint sadness in the word. No, I'm not accusing you of anything I cannot prove. Tom's pulse steadied. Prove. That was the boundary. Albus could suspect whatever he liked. Suspicions were ghosts, haunting but unable to touch. Albus continued quietly. I'm telling you, he said, that I see you. Tom's smile was small and perfect. Then you see a student who wants Hogwarts to be safe. Albus's eyes held his. You want Hogwarts to be yours, he said. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Tom did not flinch. He did not deny it. Not directly. He tilted his head slightly, as if amused by an adult's dramatic imagination. Hogwarts belongs to everyone who learns here, Tom said. Albus's gaze did not move. No, he replied. It doesn't. For a heartbeat, Tom felt a flicker of something almost like irritation. Albus was not like Armando. Albus would not be soothed by polite answers. Albus had an inner steadiness that made him difficult to push. Tom let the irritation vanish. I'm sorry you feel that way, he said gently. Albus's voice remained calm. Tom, he said, whatever you are building, whatever you think you are becoming, it will not end as you imagine. Tom's smile held. And what do you imagine, sir? Albus looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, very softly, loneliness. Tom's eyes narrowed a fraction, so quickly it might have been imagined. Loneliness. The word was meant as a warning, perhaps even as pity. Tom had lived with loneliness his entire life. He did not fear it. He used it. Albus stepped back, as if ending a conversation that had never truly begun. Go to class, he said quietly. Tom inclined his head. Of course, he replied. He walked away without hurrying, his back straight, his footsteps unhurried. Only when he turned the corner did he allow the smile to fade. Albus had seen something. Not enough, but something. Tom's plan to control the school had worked too well, too quickly. Attention was a double-edged thing. He had become a solution, and solutions were examined. He would need to be more careful, more subtle. The castle had offered him a weapon beneath its stones, and he had used it to shape fear. But the school had another weapon, one that smiled softly and watched without blinking. Tom's mind sharpened with new focus. If he could not own Hogwarts openly, he would own it differently. He would leave pieces of himself inside it. He would return when he could no longer be stopped. And when he returned, Albus's calm eyes would not matter. The award was given in the great hall under candlelight that made everything look older, more sacred than it was. Students sat at their tables in tense excitement, whispering, watching the staff table as if waiting for a verdict. Tom stood near the front, hands folded, face composed into modest humility. The polished stone beneath his shoes reflected the floating candles and broken shards of light. He could feel the eyes on him like heat, admiration from younger students, envy from older ones, curiosity from those who had once dismissed him as merely clever. Armando rose, clearing his throat. Students, he began, his voice echoing softly. This year has been difficult. We have suffered a tragedy. We have faced fear. But we have also witnessed courage and service. Tom listened, letting Armando's words wash over him like ceremony. None of it mattered except the conclusion. Armando gestured toward Tom. It is my honor to present a special award for services to the school, he announced, and the great hall erupted into applause. Tom stepped forward at the right pace, slow enough to appear reluctant, quick enough to seem dutiful. Armando handed him a gleaming trophy and a certificate edged in gold. The medal was cool in Tom's hands. He felt the weight of it and understood what it truly was. Not gratitude, but legitimacy. Horace clapped loudly, beaming as if Tom's success were his own. Several students cheered. Abraxas's face shone with pride. Cassius looked almost relieved, as if the applause meant the world was safe again. Tristan's grin was sharp. Gaius watched, thoughtful. Tom bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, headmaster," he said, voice steady. "I only did what I thought was right." The line was perfect. It painted him as selfless. It erased the dead girl's terror and replaced it with a comforting story, the brilliant student who saved them all. Armando's eyes shone. "We are fortunate," he said, voice thick, "to have such students." Tom turned toward the hall, lifting the trophy just slightly, acknowledging the applause. He let his eyes sweep over the faces. He saw relief like a fever breaking. He saw how desperately they wanted to believe in safety. And at the staff table, he saw Albus. The professor did not clap loudly. He did not beam. He watched Tom with an expression that was not anger, not hatred, but something colder. Understanding tempered by restraint. Albus's gaze was like the edge of a knife held still. Tom met it briefly and smiled. Small, polite, almost grateful. Albus's eyes did not change. The applause faded eventually, and Armando sat down with a satisfied sigh. The feast resumed. Plates filled. Conversations turned to exams and summer plans, as if tragedy could be packed away like a trunk. Tom returned to his seat, the trophy placed carefully beside him. Abraxas leaned in, whispering, "You did it." Tom's expression softened into something that looked like pleasure. "We did what we needed," he replied. Tristan's voice was excited. "They're eating out of your hand." Tom sipped his drink. "They're eating because they want to forget," he said quietly. "Forgetting is a kind of hunger, too." Cassius stared at the trophy. "What happens now?" Tom's eyes drifted to the enchanted ceiling, where stars glittered above them. "Now," he said, voice smooth, "we prepare for what comes next." Gaius watched him carefully. "And what is next?" Tom smiled faintly. "The school thinks the danger is gone," he said. "That makes them careless. Carelessness creates openings." Abraxas's eyes gleamed. "Openings for what?" Tom's fingers rested on the edge of the trophy, feeling its cold shine. "For me," he said softly, and allowed himself the smallest, most private satisfaction. He had not taken the castle. Not fully. But he had taken something from it, a public crown, however small, and the proof that he could shape fear into obedience. Albus watched from the staff table, silent. Tom raised his goblet in a small toast, to the hall, to the teachers, to the school that applauded its own manipulation. In his mind, beneath the polite surface, he spoke a vow to the stones themselves. This was not the end. This was merely the first time Hogwarts had called him savior. The next time, it would call him master. The castle quieted as the year bled toward its end. Exams came and went. Students packed trunks. Owls arrived with travel plans and parental instructions. Tom stayed late in the common room some evenings, letting people speak to him as if he were a confidant, a leader, a reassuring presence. He smiled. He nodded. He offered advice that sounded generous and was always useful to him. But the nights were his. In the Slytherin dormitory, the light from the lake above wavered through the windows, painting the stone walls in slow green ripples. The other boys slept, their breathing heavy, their bodies loose with exhaustion and relief. Abraxas lay on his bed with one arm flung over his face, as if he could block out dreams. Cassius muttered in his sleep. Tristan laughed once, quietly, then fell silent. Gaius slept with unsettling stillness, as though even unconscious he was listening. Tom sat on his bed with a single candle burning beside him. The trophy caught the flame and threw it back in bright, sharp glints. The certificate lay folded beneath it, a symbol of official praise. Tom felt nothing for the paper itself. Paper was for other people. The diary lay open on his knees. Its pages were no longer blank. Ink crawled across them as if written by an invisible hand, forming words Tom did not speak aloud. The magic was quiet, intimate, like a whisper in a locked room. He watched the lines appear, feeling the faint tug inside himself, the strange sense of something missing and something else filling the gap. He closed the diary slowly and rested his palm on the cover. Myrtle's face rose in his mind, not in guilt, but as a point on a map. Her death had been a door. He had stepped through it and left a piece of himself behind. The sensation still lingered, subtle and sharp, like a scar that had healed too cleanly. Tom's gaze shifted to the ceiling as if he could see through stone and water to the sky. Somewhere out there, beyond Hogwarts, was the world he had come from. Gray streets, a crowded orphanage, a name spoken without respect. Somewhere out there was the man whose blood had made Tom possible and whose existence made Tom furious. Tom's fingers tightened on the diary. He had learned enough about lineage, about old families, about secrets carried in names. He had traced threads of information until they led to something he could not ignore. A father who had abandoned his mother, a grand house that had never claimed him, a life that had gone on without him as if he were nothing. The insult of it was like acid. He exhaled slowly, calming himself. Rage was an indulgence. He would not indulge. He would act. He reached under his mattress and drew out a folded scrap of parchment. Notes, addresses, a few names written in his precise hand. He stared at one line for a long moment, then tucked it back away. The candle flame wavered. The water light on the wall rippled like a living thing. Tom picked up his wand and made a small, silent charm. The dormitory's sounds softened, muffled. Even the dripping of distant pipes seemed to fade. Privacy was never truly guaranteed at Hogwarts, but it could be encouraged. He opened the diary again and wrote, carefully, one simple sentence. The ink sank into the page as if absorbed by skin. For a moment, the air in the dormitory felt colder. Tom felt the pull again, the quiet, hungry magic that responded to his will. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply watched the words fade and knew that something had been done. Something irreversible. Outside the dormitory, the castle slept. Above, students dreamed of summer, of freedom, of ordinary lives. Tom dreamed of something else. Permanence. Power that did not depend on applause or approval. A self that could not be erased. He closed the diary and set it beside the trophy. Two objects, both reflections of him in different ways. One public, one secret, one praised, one hidden. Soon, he would leave the school for the summer. Soon, he would go where he had never been allowed, to a place and a name that had denied him. Soon, he would correct a wrong that had existed before he was born. And then he would return to Hogwarts with a new kind of certainty in his veins. The castle had given him a taste of control. The world would give him the rest. On the last night before the train would take them away, Tom climbed the stairs to the astronomy tower. The wind up there was sharp enough to cut. Rain struck the stone in cold needles. Lightning flashed over the lake and turned the castle's towers into jagged silhouettes against a bruised sky. Below, Hogwarts spread like a dark kingdom. Bridges and battlements, windows glowing faintly in scattered warmth. The black lake a sheet of ink swallowing the storm's reflection. Tom stood with his hands resting on the wet stone parapet, cloak snapping behind him. The rain plastered strands of hair to his forehead. He did not wipe it away. He did not shiver. The cold was nothing compared to what lived inside him, an unblinking resolve that had been forged long before Hogwarts ever opened its doors to him. He looked down at the grounds. The forbidden forest crouched at the edge of the world, black and dense. The courtyard stones glistened. A lone figure moved below, crossing the yard with unhurried steps despite the storm. Albus Dite. Even from this distance, Tom recognized the professor's posture. Calm, deliberate, as if the weather could not touch him. Albus paused, and though Tom could not see his face clearly, he felt the weight of the man's gaze rise toward the tower. For a moment, they were aligned by distance and storm. A student above, a professor below, each standing on stone that had outlived them both and would outlive whatever they became. Tom did not wave. He did not hide. He simply watched. Lightning flared again, and in the brief silver light Tom saw the castle's edges sharply, each tower a spike, each bridge a vein. He imagined the halls below, the portraits watching, the hidden passages, the sealed mouth beneath a sink in a forgotten lavatory. He imagined the beast in the dark, coiled and waiting, obedient to a language older than fear. He imagined Hogwarts as it could be, not a school, not a sanctuary, but a stronghold under a single will. A gust of wind drove rain into his face. Tom blinked slowly, his eyes never leaving the castle. He thought of the applause in the great hall, how easily it had been earned. He thought of Myrtle's still eyes. He thought of Rubius's sobs in the forest. He thought of Armando's grateful smile and Horace's proud laughter. He thought of Albus's quiet warning, loneliness, spoken as if it were a curse. Tom's mouth curved, not into a smile but into something colder. Loneliness was a small price. He leaned closer to the parapet, letting the rain soak into his sleeves, and spoke under his breath. Not in Parseltone this time, not in any language meant to command beasts. He spoke to the storm, to the stone, to the castle itself. "I will return," he whispered. Below, Albus stood still in the courtyard, the rain turning his hair dark. He did not move. He did not shout. He simply watched the tower, patient as time. Tom straightened and turned away from the parapet. He began the descent down the spiral stairs, his footsteps echoing softly against stone. Behind him, the storm roared over the towers. Ahead of him, the corridors waited. And somewhere deep beneath the school, in a chamber sealed by ancient spite and ancient pride, something stirred in its sleep, as if it had heard a promise and remembered the taste of it.